Hello and good morning. Welcome to our discussion today on how to build your toolkit, what is available to support and operationalize the FDA's recent guidance on diversity. Throughout this discussion, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will ensure that someone will get back to you. My name is Stephanie Hitchcock, and I am a Director of Project Management at PCM Trials. I specialize in how to optimize clinical trial design to support mobile visits and other decentralized elements to support recruitment and retention of participants. I'm joined today by my colleague, Chris. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Stephanie. My name is Chris Booth. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships for EmVenio Research. My job and goal within the organization is to strategically partner with sponsors, CROs across the industry to ensure proper study delivery among our community research sites and our EmVenio research centers at Prime Health. And so my job is connecting all of them and ensuring that a lot of these things that we'll talk about today can get addressed and get pushed forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. As we mentioned earlier, we're here today to talk about diversity in clinical trials and how to operationalize that recent guidance. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone joining this call that the need for diversity in clinical trial populations has been omnipresent. It's not a new need, but the focus on the requirement for diversity, especially diversifying participant populations in recruitment and enrollment, is that new piece. And so understanding what those requirements are and how you can meet them. One of the goals with diversity in clinical trials is to ensure that you're mimicking the population of those that might take the investigational product. It's required to ensure that we understand how to better treat that patient population. We've seen that racial and ethnic diversity can influence that drug's activity. And so it's really critical to have that understanding and data to ensure the most efficient and effective product for the entire patient population. Excluding certain populations from clinical trials continues to perpetuate inequity in healthcare, as those therapies are then not optimized for the patient population that is affected by that indication. So as we broaden the population of participants being included in clinical trials through diversity, then we're also ensuring that the findings of the clinical trial can be applied to that broader population, boosting that efficacy of those research outcomes. So as you can see, diversity in clinical trials is critically important to ensure that we really are addressing and supporting that indication. So again, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone on this call, but in June 2024, the FDA released a draft guidance requiring clinical trial sponsors to submit a diversity action plan for their trials. That action plan must outline specific strategies for how that clinical trial will ensure a diverse patient population is recruited. As you can see in this graphic here, there has historically been an underrepresentation in clinical trials. This graph highlights among 32,000 individuals who participated in new drug trials in the United States in 2020. The dark blue is the percent of the population by ethnic group, whereas that lighter blue is the percentage of clinical trial participants. Black, Asian, and Hispanic Americans were all underrepresented, with white Americans overrepresented. This is without diversity action plans. With a diversity action plan, the goal is to ensure that it is more representative of the population, but not just, of course, the United States population, but the population of that participant group. I'm going to hand it over to Chris to talk a little bit more about how the FDA's diversity action plan process works.
Yeah, that's right. So as Stephanie mentioned, this came out as a guidance, and it's important to recognize that the FDA views this as a guidance in kind of what's thought to be an initial step towards seeing how diversity can grow within clinical trials. Now, it's different than a requirement because they have not yet rejected any sort of molecule or any sort of drug development process because of lack of representation. However, there is a distinct possibility that protocol builds, analyses of data, and things of that nature are going to be much higher under a microscope with this guidance. And that potentially coming down the pipeline, you could see governmental action into this. Now, what does this actually build out and how does this actually look when it comes to developing diversity action plan? Well, there's actually more steps to it than just coming up with an idea. Not only do you have to come up with that idea in this first box that you see, where there are certain clinical studies that provide comprehensive plans, it's going to be your plans on how to diversify, how to reach potential study participants. You have to also justify any sort of criteria that may exclude potential participants. So anything that is noted as part of your IE or even your geographic or regional reach could have something to do with that. Now, the important thing about this too is to understand that there is a level of access when it's also dealing with the type of therapeutic indication. Therapeutic indication for a specific treatment plan or a specific group has to then be represented within that group of patient representatives that you have for the study, right? So if it's something that is predominant in one type of race or one type of group over another, that actually has to be recognized now in this diversity plan and in these DAPs. There is no actual percentage guidance. We get that question a lot. Is there a 50% one, or does it have to match the population that are in my country for the clinical trials? It's not that broken down yet, but this is why we'll discuss come later on. It's important to have a partner in these development plans because they can actually understand who's going to be there, what geographic region is possible, what geographic region is better for the operation of the study. So the building of these plans is by far and away the largest chunk that you're going to see. It's the most intricate area that the guidance touches on, but it does then drive further in to these down the steps. So the second step in this process is obviously monitoring the progress. Now, this is about tracking participants. Now, a lot of sponsors, CROs, people who are putting on these trials have implemented, say, like 2-to-1 ratios or 1-to-1 ratios, something of that nature that comes up that we have to then, from a site perspective, kind of follow and move through on this guidance. We show screening results. We show pre-screening numbers, things of that nature, in order to make sure it aligns with the DAP. But to do that is an extra layer of monitoring from the sites. So it's important to understand and create this partnership with the site group that they understand where you're coming from and what you're actually trying to accomplish with your plan. Monitoring this progress typically done with people like CTMs or CRAs in the industry, ensuring that your recruitment goals and your screening goals are all up to par with the DAP. And then finally, at the end of the trial, you look through the data on the diversity numbers, you report all of the findings. Now, this is where the rubber can actually meet the road. If you come through and all of a sudden you recognize that you did not follow your diversity action plan, you did not partner with the correct group to actually bring in the correct numbers, you did not show that your population was well represented. At this point, then, it can either extend the amount of your lifetime of your trial, which can then further extend development process. It can hamper in the investment process that's happening with these molecules. So it's important to get this right from the beginning because as it comes back, and if it shows, it may not actually end up coming through in the end, or your endpoints may be subjugated to scrutiny, or it may actually be pushed out or not accepted. Again, we haven't seen that yet. Waiting to see if that's actually going to be something that comes down the line in the next few years. So that's essentially how these action plans run through. But what does it say about how to actually activate those action plans? Well, this is actually a snippet, and I won't read the entire thing for the sake of the webinar. But this is essentially what the roles and responsibilities of the sponsors look like and how that can work with decentralized elements. So for years, decentralized elements have been a kind of a banner or a flag that people have used to say that they can access research naive populations, and not even marginalized ones, but certainly those as well. But even the populations that just don't have research access. So many people have thrown out this idea of decentralizing it. But there's been very little understanding and very little robust guidance around this. So, what does this look like from the diversity action plan guidance? Well, it actually talks about outreach, right? And we'll highlight some of these areas. It's talking about utilizing partnerships with local health institutions, right? So, whether that may be your pharmacies, whether that may be your clinics, it actually also talks about engagement in community areas, right? How can you bring these patients close to where they meet in their communities? So, not just HCPs, which is referenced in here and in this guidance, not just the pharmacies, but also the homes that they live in, the churches that they belong to, the civic organizations, and how can these partnerships really expand? So it takes a group that's really being penetrated into these areas, right? Into where these patients actually reside, into where they live, into where they work. And bringing those related activities into those areas reduces travel, improves engagement, which improves your recruitment and improves your retention. Because retention in here is just as important as recruitment. And everybody likes to talk about recruiting patients and diversity, and we have these recruitment numbers. But some of the biggest problems that you witness in the industry when it comes to marginalized populations, when it comes to research naive uh, participants, is not simply the recruitment, it's the longevity of their work inside of that trial and whether they're willing to stay on for the entirety of it. Breaking down the barriers and making what was previously difficult for those research participants easier for those research participants is exactly what the intention and the spirit of this guidance is meant for. And to do that, though, it kind of takes an extra step and again, an extra layer to understand that. So that's what this says about here. Let's look now in talking about implementing this. So, what are the barriers that we're finding? Why do we need partners to help do this? Well, as with anything, regulatory uncertainty. So, everything likes to be built, everything likes to have a firm place. And FDA's come out with this guidance. They have this a lot of understanding, a lot of word and verbiage around this, but have all the regulatory groups really bought into it? So we have governmental recommendation, but then there's still a level, and inside the clinical research industry, there's always this level of slow adaptation to ensure that we're doing the right thing for the right people at all points, whether that's through government guidance or whether that's through independent regulatory bodies. What happens when those two things seem to conflict? There's not a conflict here because everybody recognizes, as Stephanie really says, that this is a need and this is something that is incredibly important. However, there's a lot of uncertainty, not a lot of clarity in how to actually work with this decentralized element or even a hybrid element inside of the industry. Um, a lot of groups have tried to just throw something out and say, hey, we'll try this. We will try utilizing some virtual components. We'll try utilizing advanced technologies for all of this. But without a firm understanding and a foundation of how that bedrock should lie for any sort of decentralized or community research guidance, it kind of becomes a big question on whether it's actually being handled correctly or whether there are major gaps in some of this planning. And that's where that planning of the DAP really comes through, is to help understand what this regulatory uncertainty is. That's obviously one of the biggest hurdles and challenges that we find in these DAPs, is building out this regulatory uncertainty and how to make sure all of those gaps are covered. So when you're looking for people to help you out with that, it's important to grab those people who have had a lot of experience in doing this type of thing. Again, communication with the trial sites. We touched on that before when it talks about understanding and the monitoring aspect of what we need to do when it comes to planning and implementing a DAP. Communicating with your trial site is vastly important, because if the site does not understand the actual purpose and not just the techniques or requirements, but the idea and ideals behind why this is being implemented and ran, then there is an obvious gap, and you'll note that in the monitoring for recruitment and retention. Again, with that, we talked about retention, right? This is a challenge against any sort of area when it comes to clinical research, but even more so with these dropout rates of diverse groups due to the logistic barriers, right? So we have a DAP. We've got some decentralized elements in it. How can we run it? And how can it fully function in that manner? And those retention issues are kind of paramount in what we see in the end all guidance. And finally, geographic barriers. When it comes down to it, there's just not enough sites in a lot of these research naive communities. How can you expand beyond that and then move further into those communities, penetrating deeper and finding those individuals that need for recruitment and retention? So how does all that happen? Well, the trick is to find yourself a partner, right? Pre-trial planning. Work with those individuals in order to help set those clear goals up front and in order to fully understand what the goal of the endpoints are. Outline proper recruitment goals, proper trial monitoring, and also make sure that you're working through any alternative strategies that reduce the burden, right? So offer this operational flexibility in the trial designs in order to make sure that you hit those areas. But if you break those down in the beginning and clearly communicate those with all of the sites and all of the individuals and stakeholders that are represented, it becomes a lot more successful to fully operationalize these DAPs. But we've talked a lot about partners. So I'm going to turn it back to Stephanie to kind of talk a little bit more about what those partners can look like and those individuals in the industry that are kind of making a difference, and a little bit upon how PCM and EmVenio is actually working to do that as well. Stephanie?
Thanks, Chris. Uh, so again, as we noted, understanding the FDA's diversity action plan requirements, the DAP requires that you outline the specific barriers that would be present for your given trial, and the barriers to meet those diversity expectations and recruitment, and then the specific strategies that you'll deploy to meet those requirements and to overcome those barriers. This is where PCM Trials and EmVenio research can be a really critical partner. So the utilization of mobile visit services and community sites can support recruitment and retention of these diverse populations. As Chris noted a little bit earlier, it's not just meeting that recruitment goal of a different population, but also understanding that we need to enact strategies to ensure that the participants stay in the trial throughout the life of the trial, and that the data includes that diverse population's primary endpoints so that it can be appropriately analyzed and optimized for that patient population. By bringing the visits to the participant by partnering with PCM Trials and implementing mobile visits, or by employing community research sites by partnering with EmVenio Research, we can really ensure that we are offering that participant flexibility, because clinical trials are not a one-size-fits-all. We really need to adapt for these participants, for these different populations, and provide them the opportunity to do what makes the most sense for their life while being able to benefit from these clinical trials and therapies. So if you're not familiar with mobile visits, I think some people look at a mobile visit as, oh, okay, you can go draw a hematology sample. Great. And they think, it's a very small part of the trial that can be optimized by utilizing mobile visits. I'm here to let you know that there is a whole world of procedures that can be done at mobile visit services. So mobile visits are really bringing that clinician to the participant, most often at participants' homes, but also if they're on vacation, if they're a snowbird and they live half of the year in the Northeast and half of the year in Florida, making sure that they're still able to engage in the clinical trial throughout that time, whether they're not able to go to the site, or if it's just their preference. And so In utilizing mobile visit services, we can support a whole range of visit procedures. There can be receipt of investigational product, accountability, reconstitution of investigational product, administration of IP, EKGs, ECGs, drawing and processing laboratory specimens, all of the activities that would standardly be done at a site that can reasonably be done at an alternate location can be done at a mobile visit. In conducting those protocol-specific activities where the participant is, it enables the trial to collect all of that data, but then the data is sent back to the site. So the clinicians conducting the mobile visit are an extension of the site. They're working on behalf of that site. All of the data is sent back to the site that they're supporting for review, for entry into the EDC, and to ensure that everything was conducted per protocol. The use of mobile visits really do drive greater trial diversity. So I showed you that slide a little bit earlier with the dark blue showing the percent of the US population and the lighter blue showing the percentage of those ethnic groups that were enrolled in clinical trials in 2020. This is comparing trials of similar modalities, similar indication, and procedures, looking at trials that utilized mobile nursing and those that did not utilize mobile nursing and how they represented different ethnic groups. You can see that the ones that are in the dark blue were the ones that did not utilize mobile nursing, and they had a lower percentage of representing these different ethnic groups, where those that did utilize mobile nursing were able to have a much increased percentage of those ethnic groups in the trial population. So it's really important to understand that these mobile visits, they not only expand who can be enrolled in the clinical trial because it does broaden the geography of the site. In this image, the orange dots are a standard US site location, and the blue dots are where PCM Trials clinicians are located in the United States. Not only does it broaden that reach of the site, so if there is a participant in Alaska who has the indication, but it's not feasible for them to go to this site in California, we can send a clinician out to the participant in Alaska and start doing some of those procedures, get them enrolled. Maybe the screening visit or the baseline visit needs to be done at site, but they can go to California, but that's a long trip for them. They can only do that once. They can't be going back every week or every month for the visits as required per protocol. That's an excellent use of mobile research services because that clinician can go to the participant, ensure that they're staying enrolled in that trial, they're meeting those visits, they're getting those data points without having to travel across the ocean and get to the site in California. So in addition to increasing that retention and ensuring that they're able to stay in the visit regardless of the circumstances of their life, if they have to move, if they have to relocate for any reason, it also expands the reach of that brick and mortar site to be able to access more participants. I've talked quite a bit about how the mobile visit side can support these diversity action plans. And I'm going to turn it back over to Chris to talk a little bit more about how those community research site locations can really support that diversity action plan.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So I think the combined idea here is about reach. And, we touched on it whenever we were talking about the actual DAP guidance, and we talked about it when we actually had some of the planning discussions and things like that. And it's about meeting the research participants where they are, both in their life journey, in their medical journey, in their treatment journeys, as well as their geographic locations, right? And their homes. It's becoming a growing trend, and there are quite a few different pieces of literature out there and articles about the idea of medical treatment more close to home and what that looks like by treating individuals and patients actually in their home or in a local clinic, somewhere that they feel comfortable and about the different reactions that they have towards these treatments and towards this work that they're doing with them. And holistically, it makes for a much better and much quicker type of treatment plan. And they follow regimens faster, which is it's critical for research. When following protocol areas, they have a better sense and a better reaction to these studies because they feel like they have a little bit more control in with them, because they don't feel like they're having to go somewhere else outside of their own elements in order to have these research studies. So in those cases, this idea of being local to the individuals is drastically important in order to work through all of those barriers that we talked about earlier in the DAP. We talked about that from a mobile visit or a home visit standpoint, but what if you actually have to have a site area? What if you have to have somebody go in to visit? Well, this idea of community research has now all of a sudden become a boom. It's becoming a new word and a new slogan, which has been great and welcomed in the EmVenio world. It's something that we've been doing and feel passionately for many years now. And the idea is bringing research clinics to these communities and putting them in the areas where research participants see them the most and can feel the most at home. So what you see here is actually a map of sites that are around the country. The blue sites recognize these community research locations, while the orange sites are actual hospital partnerships that EmVenio has with Prime Health, and they are inside the hospital area. But these are all research naive participants. These are all patients who have really no research experience, as well as deep into communities that recognize the need for greater expansion, right? These marginalized populations, these research naive populations, that bodes to question. How do you run with these? Are there safety net hospitals out there? How can you get access into these other research strapped areas? That's where these really come into play. These community research sites that we show are actually what we would call, or what some people in the industry have called, mobile sites. However, they're not really mobile. They're actually stationary sites that exist inside of these communities. It's essentially like going in and opening a brick and mortar site, only instead of that, we bring a fully intact site into these communities. So you see, like in our Chicago area, for instance, it's located in the Illinois Medical District, right, which is downtown Chicago, a North Little Rock location, located in partnerships with some local churches, a local church in that area, in order to, again, recognize where these individuals are. But what does a community research site look like, right? So if we can go on to the next area, we'll actually see what these sites can be. So this is the external look of what a customized community research site can look like. As I said before, it looks like it's mobile, right? But just because it's on wheels does not necessarily mean that it's moving around. All of these are actually connected to shore power, and they're all with a permanent address on 1572s, on CLIA certified labs, all of these different areas. Inside of all of these can then run exactly like a regular research site. So there's two exam rooms, one in the front, one in the back. There is a fully operational restroom facility on board. There is, as I mentioned, a CLIA certified lab with -80, -20 ambient temperatures, centrifuges, fibroscans, spirometry, anything that's necessary for a clinical research site that you would normally see in a hospital or an area, as long as it can have some sort of component to fit inside, can actually be deployed. There are components such as MRIs, or X-rays that need to happen. Then we're actually partnered up with other local areas to be able to provide those scans in that area, so that you're still not taking the research participant outside of the community. But now, one of the biggest differentiators that you see is that not only are these sites inside of a community, but they're actually also staffed by individuals from within that community. right? So in order to really fully operationalize a lot of these DAPs, not only do you have to understand that people who are maybe hesitant about clinical research from the get-go, not only are you introducing all of this, but you're also recognizing the fact that they need to see the people who they know in their community. So, what does that actually look like? Well, hybrid and decentralized. So, there are actual solutions in here and a level of decentralization that all of the companies have come into become quite prolific in their mastery of, right? Whether that's PCM or EmVenio, utilizing virtual technologies, utilizing capabilities for in-home and for site. Diversity, obviously, as we've talked about through this entire presentation, is about being a patient-centric solution. Recruitment and quality actually go both hand in hand on that, in that you're audit ready culture for those individuals and supporting the individuals that are inside these trials, and as well as being enabled with all the latest technology in order to be able to run through these trials and how that works. So when you see these community research sites, when you see these areas, how does that actually look and translate into the end point of this research? Well, it comes through this site selection area. So it is critical in addressing disparities, having the right sites. Some therapies require intricate medical work that can only be found in an academic hospital in those areas. But most studies have some form or component that can actually be utilized outside of those academic med centers. In fact, about 85% of research can be operationalized outside of those areas. So while sometimes you may find recognized situations, it's important to understand what a site can do for you and how you can address that through proper site selection, right? How does that work? Well, EmVenio, speaking from the experience of this company, actually partners with data intelligence platforms that then gives us an understanding of what the social and community risks are. So when you're looking at these areas of marginalized populations, where do these sites typically not exist? And how does that find? So we utilize that through a partnership with social determinants of health. We look at these community matrix. We figure out where there's things like financial strain, food insecurity, could be research deserts, could be healthcare deserts, could be areas that are just not represented uh, by any sort of major healthcare entity. Could be the use of safety net hospitals in the area, right? Ones that specialize in utilizing government funding, right? Your FQHCs, areas like that really don't conduct a lot of research because the populations in the area are not very stable in their representation. So EmVenio then comes in, recognizes these areas, and then brings in one of those sites that builds up the community and builds up the research inside of that site. That's how these locations are determined. And that's why, for the most part, many of these locations remain permanent for the time that they're actually still open and running, right? They don't drive around from house to house. They create this level of community inside of these sites. And it's not just conducting research, it's about helping express healthcare in the community, right? So sometimes you'll see basically just blood draws, mobile phlebotomy. They can do blood draws for blood testing, memory care tests, things of that nature that are outside of actually normal research protocols, but still imperative for the health of an organization and the community inside of that. When it comes to the delivery of such, that's how you end up finding where these pinpoints go. So back to the DAPs and how this builds through your toolkit. This is what you need to be looking at when you're figuring out and recognizing a partner in actionalizing these operational outlines. So by doing this, we run at about a 98%, 99% of enrollment targets to the actual achievement of the study. We're at 44% where they're self-identified as a minority, but over 50% in what's considered diverse participant populations as recognized by regulatory and governmental agencies. This is how those community sites then end up driving those plans and driving those actions to fruition. So now that being said, I'm going to put it back to Stephanie. We're going to talk about a little bit more about where everything goes and kind of conclude it out with all the points and how PCM and EmVenio kind of close out all of these recognition.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Chris just highlighted a lot of our experience and success with those community sites. This slide really just is meant to show the combined experience of PCM Trials and EmVenio. And what I think you should really take away from this is the trust that these organizations have gained with the larger research community. We've been entrusted with over 675 trials, conducted over 95,000 mobile visits, established more than 23 sites globally, and are operational in extending the reach of clinical trials and reaching participants in over 80 countries. We're very lucky that we've been able to gain the trust of sponsors and CROs to reach these diverse and research naive, or as Chris importantly noted, research hesitant patients and include them in these clinical trial participant populations. So how do you operationalize this and add it to your toolkit for creating those diversity action plans? So first and foremost, really thinking outside the box when it comes to that trial design. Think about what your diversity goals are. Start with that at the beginning before the protocol is really built out to see, all right, where do we expect these participants to be? What do we expect to be the biggest barriers for these participants? And how can we increase that diversity? Is it setting up a community research site in an area where there's a dense population of these diverse participants? Is it enabling mobile visits so that we can increase that retention or the reach of the site? More often than not, it's both. It's utilizing multiple modalities to ensure that there is that flexibility and casting a wider net to ensure that you are able to meet those goals. I know one of the things that we get a little bit of pushback on is, well, that's a great deal of cost to do all of that up front. Maybe we'll come back to it once we get some feedback. I understand that, but I would also press to say the investment in it up front will pay dividends in not getting feedback from those regulatory agencies that this is not a diverse enough patient population, or having to then bring a vendor on halfway through your trial because you're not meeting those recruitment goals, or you're not able to retain the patients because everyone's dropping out after month 6. We can't get anyone to come back to the sites. Implement these strategies early so that you are able to meet your timelines or expedite your timelines, and then you can submit for approval sooner. That is also highlighted in that greater emphasis on the participant-centric solutions. So as we said, making sure that there are multiple modalities that can be flexed for the participant based on their specific circumstances. As we said earlier, clinical trials are not one size fits all. We need to ensure that we are making things easier for those participants and giving them options that will increase that retention and get them to stay with the trial throughout the life cycle of it. Partnering with partners such as PCM Trials and EmVenio Research to look at what solutions are available to meet those diversity goals. What additional things can be put into the protocol or into your trial design to ensure that you're meeting those goals? It's wonderful to look at that within your organization, but really no one can be an expert in everything. Go to your partners and say, what have you seen be the most successful in this participant population? Where do you think we could increase our reach for diversity? We're always here to partner and to talk through that and really encourage you to lean on your partners in that respect. And then finally, looking at that global adoption of diversity standards. So we know that obviously the FDA has recently put this out. We're starting to see it with MHRA and EMA, and being cognizant that that real world data to engage those underrepresented populations is going to be critical. That global data can be utilized to support your FDA submission. And so being cognizant of that, not just when you're creating a clinical trial design when the US is involved, but if your phase one was ex-US only, then being cognizant of ensuring that you're still looking for those diversity goals. That data can be used to support that broader package. All right, we know we've thrown a lot at you today. If you've asked any questions or if you haven't yet asked a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat and we will ensure to have someone get back to you. But we really appreciate you all taking the time to join us today. It's something that we're very passionate about, extending the reach of those clinical trials, and just delighted to speak with all of you. So thank you so much for your time.